Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast, coming to you from the Long Valley Studio in Washington, Utah. I'm your host, Dave Markle, and this is episode 186. Before we get into today's conversation, I want to take a moment to prepare you for what you're about to hear. This episode deals with child sexual abuse, specifically child-on-child sexual abuse, something that, quite honestly, does not get talked about nearly enough. It's uncomfortable, it challenges assumptions, and because of that, it often stays buried. But avoiding it doesn't make it go away. It just keeps people silent. My guest today is Joseph Bourne. Joseph grew up in Alaska, in an environment that, on the surface, looked like the kind of childhood most people would envy. Freedom, adventure, the outdoors. But underneath that was an experience that shaped him in ways he didn't fully understand until much later. In this conversation, Joseph shares his story with a level of honesty that is not easy to come by. We talk about how trauma can show up in behavior, how shame and secrecy take hold early, and what it actually takes to begin working through something like this as an adult. This is a powerful conversation. It's not an easy one, but it's one that matters. Here's Joseph. Hey, SAS listeners, welcome back to the show. I'm very happy and honored to have with me in the studio today, Joseph Bourne. Joseph lives up in Alaska, and he contacted me a couple of weeks ago. We started chatting back and forth, and here he is. I'm really thankful that you're here. Thanks for joining me, Joseph.
Yeah, of course.
Joseph, if you could introduce yourself to my audience, tell us a bit about yourself. Also, if you don't mind, how you found the show.
Yeah, I am from Alaska. I'm actually half Native Alaskan myself. Lived here my whole life. And I found your podcast through Spotify. I was trying to find other stories to listen to, which can be difficult sometimes because it filters out a lot. But I did manage to find a few, and I've been listening to them when I have time. And I'm just really glad that you're doing this.
Thank you. That means everything to me. When people tell me that, it's like fuel to my soul. It helps me keep up my motivation to keep going. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for saying what you said. I'm glad you found the show. It's really a show of strength when somebody listens to the show, but then turns around and reaches out to me. I can't tell you how much that means to me. I hope other listeners follow through with doing the same thing, because it's I think, very helpful when people tell their stories. It's part of human nature to want to tell about ourselves and our experiences, especially if we're in the healing process. Other people can heal from our story too. Thanks again. Joseph, tell us some more about yourself, maybe some background growing up in Alaska, what that's been like. Without going into your story, I'll ask you about that in a minute, but what was it like for you growing up in Alaska?
A lot of outdoor stuff from early childhood and onwards. There's a lot of the outdoors to see here and a lot to do out there. I am adopted. I was taken in by a wonderful family.
Oh, nice.
I'm from the interior of Alaska. Alaska's huge, and there's a lot of different cultures and dynamics depending on where you live. And I'm just really glad I was born in Alaska because I can't imagine living anywhere else.
Joseph, let's get into it, if you don't mind. What are you able to tell us about your rape or sexual assault experience?
All right, here we go.
Yeah.
Start with when I was a very unruly child, as some might say. I was very, I don't want to say delinquent, but I had a lot of bad behaviors even before my abuse started when I was about 6. I put my parents through a lot. And I grew up in between Fairbanks and North Pole. It's kind of like this no man's land. I didn't have that many neighbors. I can only remember hanging out with like 2 or 3 at most, and it took a little while to get to their houses. So I didn't really have that neighbor experience. It was basically me and my dog exploring the backwoods behind our house. And we did a lot of swimming in it's like a large pond behind our place too. But then some neighbors moved in one of the apartments my parents rent, and they had a boy my age, which I was very just excited because I finally had someone to play with who lived close to me. It started out very normal. Like we would play together, Legos outside, all the normal kid stuff. And one thing I think should be discussed more is like child on child sexual abuse, because it happens. It happens a lot. And unfortunately, this younger brother, there was two brothers, younger and older, and that's how I'll refer to them. One day he asked me if I wanted to see how like they had fun in their family, and he took me to his parents' bedroom, and I remember very clearly him like opening the top drawer, and there was porn and sex toys and all this other stuff, and I was very confused because I'd never seen that kind of stuff before. And I do remember my parents having the stranger danger talk with me. I think that was very common in the 80s and 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely stuck with me. But I don't know if they ever did, but I don't recall them telling me like someone can't touch you in your private area or any sort of talk like that. So I didn't really know that this wasn't, I knew it wasn't normal, but I didn't know it was bad either.
Right.
And I will say I found it interesting and exciting. Interesting in the sense that a kid would. I remember at some point we went back to my bedroom. We spent a lot of time because I had a bunch of Legos. I had this giant tub full of Legos.
Mm.
My poor parents probably spent a fortune on them. And he like wanted to show me the fun again, and we both got naked. I remember that, and I at this point I just knew it wasn't normal. It's not what we're supposed to do, but like this was my neighbor. This was a friend. I didn't have that many friends, so I just went along with it, and we touched each other, and we were so young. I was about 6, and so was he. He might have actually been a year younger than me. I don't recall exactly. It only happened 1 or 2 times with him, the actual assault initially. And like I said, I think child on child abuse is not talked about enough. Because obviously, when that happens, the other child's being abused. Typically, that's not something a child just knows about.
Mm-hmm.
And I know he just said like it's a secret, so I kept it a secret. Again, this was my friend, and I didn't want to lose it. And I can't recall if it was later that day or the next day, but it was definitely within that time frame. The older brother came over, and when I answered the door, it was the older brother, and I had seen him before, and he'd hung out with the younger brother and and like I trusted him. Again, it was a neighbor. He was much older, so I just thought it was a little weird that he would come over, but I had borrowed stuff from them. I don't exactly remember what, but sometimes he answered the door and was the only one home, and he'd take it and then close the door. Like I said, I remember my grandma being in the kitchen, and I don't remember what I said. Something probably like, we're going to go play upstairs. And it was very, looking back, it was just not normal. But at the time, I didn't really know that.
Yeah.
I didn't really think much of him being that much older. I mean, I knew it was strange, but like I said, they were my neighbors and they were my friends, even if I didn't know him that well. And I remember the door closing, and I don't recall exactly what he said, but it was something to the lines of, I know you and my younger brother had fun. Let me show you like how you can actually have it, because like we were so young we couldn't like perform the sexual act. And I'm not sure why I went along with it. I probably didn't know any better. I was very young. And we got undressed, and at this point I remember being scared because I didn't know what was happening. But the other thing I remember very clearly is him smiling as he closed the door. That's one of the first things that came to me when we started doing trauma therapy on this. And that always unsettled me, and it still does. Like I can feel the hairs on my arm sticking up when I talk about it. But he put me on the bed, and felt me up and then sexually assaulted me, raped me. And it was horrible. I don't remember all of it. I know I was supposed to keep quiet. That's probably my grandma didn't hear anything. Probably I was young, but I probably just associated and just let it happen. And then it was over. And he said, "This is a secret. You can't tell anybody." He did a lot of grooming over the course of the abuse, saying stuff like, "You're the only one I can do this with. You're such a special person." I'm sure a lot of kids who are being abused have heard that. And even though there's pain and trauma associated with him saying that, there's also a kid's, I don't know how to say it, a kid's pride or something of being told that specialness.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
I don't think the younger brother and I did much after that. Like I said, I couldn't do what he wanted to do because I was so young, which is penetrate him. But the older brother continued to abuse me. I don't know how many times. Not a great amount, but it continued on for a while. Sometimes in my bedroom, sometimes in his. He shared a bedroom with his brother. After they moved out, I hated that middle bedroom because that's where it was, in the middle of the apartment. I never really knew why when I was younger, but looking back as an adult, I know why.
Yeah.
I did not like that room at all. Because when someone would move out, I helped clean the apartment sometimes, and I did not like that middle room. Sorry. One thing that's vivid is after one of the abuse sessions, I don't remember if it's the first or the latter right now, he told me to wash the bedding. And that was very difficult to do. I remember not really knowing how to work the washer. I remember not knowing how much soap to put in and all that stuff. And that one hits me one of the hardest things just because no child should have to do that. And it hurt. But I would keep it a secret and do what he wanted because he told me to. Eventually, they had to move out. I'm not exactly sure of all the details. I know my parents found out they haven't really told me exactly they're abusing a kid. I think they found out they're abusing their own kids. And then I'm not sure if the police were contacted or anything, but I remember my dad said, like, you have to fucking move out tomorrow. And from what I understand, they said that that's not possible. That's not realistic. And my dad didn't budge. And then they moved out the next day. There was a mixture of emotions. On the one hand, I had relief. My abusers were out of my life. But on the other hand, I was sad because it wasn't all just being abused. It was playing outside and then being abused. It was playing with my Legos and being abused. It was this weird mixture. And there were things I did during the abuse to try to make it so it wouldn't happen. One thing I talked about before is I had peed in my Lego set. Like, I had a big tub of Legos, and I remember peeing in it. That way we wouldn't have anything to play with because that was one of the things we played with the most. My parents were furious about that. I mean, as an adult, I can see why. They were very expensive. As a kid, I don't remember what I told them exactly, but I think I said I just did it. One of the other things, I would try to get in trouble on purpose. Not that I had many friends' house to go over to or people to come over to my house, but when I got in trouble, no one could come over for like the next day or two. So I would do things to get in trouble because I was safe and had this break for a little while. And it wasn't always that way. There was like I mentioned earlier, I was a very troubled child even before the abuse, and I did a lot of bad things, but that is one thing that sticks out. Yeah, it was terrible. I was 7 and 8. I remember now when all this happened, but I was very happy overall when they left. My behaviors definitely got worse after the abuse. They were bad to begin with. My mom, my biological mom, did not a lot, but she drank and did drugs while she was pregnant with me, which kind of affected a bit of my development. So I think that's partially why I was a bad kid. Bad, air quotes. And I also, was just very oppositionally defiant. Even when I was just 5 before the abuse, I was starting fires and like stealing little stuff and all that. My dad told me about a time I lit the interior of one of his work trucks on fire, which I don't really remember too well. I remember doing it though, barely. And after they had moved, my behaviors definitely spiraled down. I skipped classes a lot. I was a bully. I remember one time the girl who sat in front of me in elementary school, I don't remember which grade, I did not like her, and she bullied me as well. I remember one of the words she would call me was pansy. I knew what the term meant. I think when we were younger, we made it more than it would be, but she really made me mad calling me that, probably tied to the abuse that I endured. And I tried to cut her hair while she was sitting in front of me, but she turned around, so I just cut her backpack. But I did a lot of stuff like that. It kind of spiraled even further when I was a teenager. A lot of conduct disorder. And I can't say how much of that was the abuse and how much of that was just how I was born. It got pretty bad. And when I was 14, I was working at a summer camp as a dishwasher. And I, at the time, came out as gay to the camp counselor. And she called my parents in from the city, because we were about an hour outside the city. We're at this lake, and we had this meeting in her cabin. I just remember all of us in a circle, and I told my parents that, and they were just like shocked, I think. I don't know why they were so shocked, because there was definitely instances where it was apparent, but I started to tell them what happened with the younger brother. I don't know how much I said. I do remember my mom's face just changing completely when I started talking about what the younger brother and I did. And then the way I remember it was they both just closed off. It was like I was trying to talk to them. I was underwater. They couldn't really hear me. That was my experience. I don't know what it felt like for them. But before I could really even start telling them what happened with the older brother, they just shut down and said, that didn't happen. You were just playing house. And I remember getting upset, and I was trying to talk about what else happened. And it was like a chant, like, you're just playing house. You're not gay. You're just playing house. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. And from then on, I think I just repressed the memories. I said, oh, it didn't happen. And I stuffed it as far down as I could. I talked about it before. I buried it down. I covered it with concrete, but it would keep working its way up like some sort of super trauma, just breaking through, and then I'd have to do it all over again. But right after that, my parents sent me away to this boarding school for troubled youth. I actually love my time there. It was this faith-focused boarding school, and we mostly just did stuff outdoors, even in winter. And I really like that, being from Alaska. I got to swim a lot in the summer. I even got to do some trade classes, like woodworking and metalworking. And I thought that was awesome. The time there wasn't all bad. There was some bowling. I did the bowling. Other people did. I mean, it's a group of boys. Mm-hmm. This one's really hard to talk about. I had moved down to the end of the hallway in one of the rooms, which has 2 bunk beds. Because the better you were, the more you could move down the hallway. Because the further up the hallway you were, the counselor was right here. So you kind of get away with stuff. One of the other boys staying in the room with me, he was a year or 2 older. One night he just forced himself on me. I remember being pinned to the ground and just terrified. I slept in my boxers, so I remember him pulling them down, and then he raped me, and that was probably one of the worst experiences I've ever had. This will be something I touch on later, but I had been seeing a therapist, and I told her, though, the worst part of it was I just remember crawling back to my bed on my hands and knees. And he just went back to sleep. And it was a very emasculating and traumatic experience, because at the time I knew what happened. I wasn't a kid. He never did it again, but I did not want to be there anymore. I remember calling my parents, because I was in Washington. They were in Alaska. And I think pretty much every time I called them, I would beg to come home. I would beg. And I know eventually they put pressure on the boarding school to graduate me so I could come home. And then I did. And I came back home, and I was away from it all. The whole time I was there, I didn't get in trouble. There was not in big trouble. There was this rock pile, and if you were really bad, you had to move rocks from one end of the field to the other. It looked miserable. I remember, I don't know what I did, but I acted out real badly after the assault, and I had to move the rock pile for the first time my time there. And that didn't help me wanting to go home. And they saw my parents saying, we're ready for him to come home, and meanwhile I'm seemingly not doing well. I don't blame the school at all. There wasn't much staff, and I know this kind of stuff happens at boarding schools. It doesn't excuse it or anything. I'm not calling it unavoidable, but it does happen. When I got home, that experience definitely didn't help with my conduct disorder. I got really bad. There was truancy. I've talked about this previously. My parents know about one of the behaviors, but one of them was I would forge checks, which is crazy looking back as a mid-teenager doing that kind of stuff. I did some joyriding. I was doing all this stuff. There's some trespassing, mostly so I could do parkour at job sites. I used to do parkour. That's how I injured my leg, but for some reason I was obsessed with parkour. I think it was some video game called Assassin's Creed. I don't remember too well. But there was a lot of these behaviors. And looking back, after doing some therapy and working with my therapist, because I have 2, looking back, I can see my boundaries were violated as a kid. And it just completely annihilated my concept of what a boundary was, I think. Because a lot of my behaviors with the conduct disorder were crossing boundaries. I knew what the proper lawful thing to do was, but I didn't really understand what a boundary was, and I had no concept of just doing it. I remember joyriding with one of my classmates, and we always return the cars, but I didn't think anything of it because it was fun, and it's not a big deal. I'm sure that's how I saw what I thought my abuser thought. It's not a big deal. I'm just doing this with this boy. And I think that carried over into a lot of my behaviors as a teenager. I never graduated. I was missing a lot of class. I wasn't doing too well. Um, One of the things I did affected my finals. I had a knife on a bus, and I don't know what I was doing, but I was talking real big, and one of the girls was mad at me, and I remember throwing it out the window on the way to school. But I guess she had already told the cops, and they pulled me out of the class, questioned me, and I'm just denied everything. It was really scary and really dramatic. But yeah, I never graduated. I never got my GED till I was what? Oh God, 22. But one thing that spun out of all of this was pornography. I was 7 when I was exposed to it, and it just became a problem almost instantly. After they moved away, I think one of my first times finding pornography again was on the TV, because there used to be, what, 5,000 channels? I don't even remember. But they had pornography channels, and I found one, and I watched it for about a week until suddenly it was pin protected. I don't know. I suspect my parents put that pin in. I can't imagine how any other way it became pin protected. And I was scared because suddenly it was secure and all this other stuff. But I got my own computer about a year or two later, and the pornography became like a big problem. That is, again, from the instant I saw it when I was 7. And for me, it was a coping mechanism for stress, for memories of what happened to me, for anything really. Like any other addiction, you're doing it to get out of whatever you're feeling. And it just accelerated throughout my teenage years. And that continued up until I was 22. When I went to treatment, which I'll talk about later, I can't really say much about it, but I had to present a timeline there of my stuff. And one of the things I differentiated on the timeline was like abuse, rape, and then consensual first kiss, consensual first everything. And I remember someone coming up to me after that and just saying, it's like really fucking sad you had to differentiate the two and put consensual versus being abused. That was really tough. I was 22 when I finally consensually lost my virginity, and then sex became a big problem. Just instantly. It was almost like this fake connection, that sort of like compulsive sexual behavior. It was probably something that reminded me of what happened with my abuser, the older brother. But things kept spiraling and spiraling with that. The trauma would come knocking on the door, and I would just almost subconsciously push it down. Like at that point, I barely remembered what happened. So I'd remember the neighbors sometimes, and then I'd start feeling uneasy and then sick, and then I'd push it back down again. A lot of it was just by my compulsive behaviors. And then it all kind of came to a head 2 years ago. My addictions were at the worst they've ever been. I haven't really talked about this much. Not enough people talk about porn and sex addiction. I'm totally down to talk about it. And it's something that needs to be known better, I think. Because 2 years ago, things were at the worst they've ever been. The compulsive sex was multiple times a day. Pornography was multiple hours a day. And if I had to work, I would sacrifice sleep to do those behaviors. At this point, things were just pushing all the way up with the trauma, and I was doing anything I could to not face that. I'd even gotten into gambling. I haven't really talked about this ever, but yeah, I had a big gambling problem with online. I worked in healthcare during COVID, and I got a lot of bonuses because it was a tough time. And I spent $12,000 over 2 years on gambling. Looking back, I'm really mad at myself, but you can't do anything about it now. But again, I was reaching for anything to keep that trauma from bubbling up again, anything. Mm-hmm. I had found a 12-step group to be a part of. It didn't really fit with me because of like my orientation. I'm still thankful I was in it. because I think it helped save my life. But it kind of tied into this, I don't know how to call it, a charismatic church. And I'm bipolar, and I was hypomanic and moving towards a manic episode. It all kind of just hit together at once. The addiction hit rock bottom. The manic episode hit its worst. I was just crossing a lot of boundaries at work and thinking I was going to reinvent religion across the world through my own being and all this other stuff. And people were enabling that because they believed in it too. But then it all came crashing down. Like I got on a better mood stabilizer that took away the mania. I hit a rock bottom and I got written up at work. And one of the things my supervisor said was, get some help. He said it plainly. I appreciate him saying that because I took it to heart and somebody needed to tell me that. That was on Christmas Eve. I was very angry. I got written up on Christmas Eve and I got this written warning. And then Christmas Day, I got on a plane and went to a treatment center for sexual compulsive behavior. I never in my whole life thought I'd go to a place like that. But it saved my life. I'm sure a lot of people say it about any rehab they go to. It saved my life. It's cliche, but it's for me, it's utterly and totally true. I'd been trying to deal with the trauma before, like in the months before I went to treatment, but I wasn't giving my therapist at the time the whole story. I talked to her about it and she said, I already knew. So, but I think I did what quite a bit of people do when they have trauma and they're not willing to talk about it or feel unsafe doing so. I gave little pieces here and there to see, is she going to use this to hurt me? Is it safe to bring this up? I suspect a lot of people's trauma do that. So I wasn't really able to get the whole help I needed. But while I was at treatment, I had to face it. I can't really say much about treatment. I signed like a lot of non-disclosures about it because it was a very serious place. Mm-hmm. But one thing I started doing there was trauma therapy. And it changed my life. I remember I did my timeline and I can't remember if it was after my timeline. I'm pretty sure it was. They said we're going to refer you to EMDR mm-hmm. with the trauma therapist. And I had done some EMDR before that, and I found it helpful. Between the work I did in the program and then the trauma therapy, it changed me. The trauma therapist there was wonderful. And the shame fell away. And the unwillingness to be open about it, feeling like I wasn't a man, all that fell away working with him. He was amazing. And I'm eternally grateful to him and everybody else there, but especially him.
Well, if it saved your life, it's super understandable that it would have such an emotional impact. So feel it, because that's allowed. And it's wonderful. If it saved your life, it's wonderful. Nothing to be ashamed of. That's awesome. I love hearing that.
He was great. Treatment saved my life. And I met people there who I still keep in touch with. A few of them almost daily, and I hope I continue to know them the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. And we still have a group chat, which I chime in every now and then to this day. And we do like an online meeting, which I go to sporadically, very sporadically. I'm very glad to have made those friends. Things weren't all magically better when I got back from treatment. Treatment did a lot of the legwork, but I had to keep going. It was tough. I started seeing, it's called a CSAT, so Certified Sex Addiction Therapist. He also does trauma therapy. There's only 2 in all of Alaska, and they're both in a tiny city an hour away. I don't know why. But one of them I work with, and he's terrific. He reminds me of the trauma therapist in treatment. That's probably why I like working with him, and I try to be as honest as I can be with him, because in treatment, that trauma therapist created a very safe space for me, and that carried over to seeing my CSAT. We did a lot of EMDR. I think for me, EMDR is very effective. I've talked to others who didn't get much from it, and that's okay. I think there's an avenue for everyone to heal in their own way. Some people I've talked to, talk therapy was very effective, and that doesn't do overly much for me when on its own. Had to do a lot of the work. I think the toughest thing was circling back to the rape at boarding school. While I was at treatment, I had to finally talk about it. I didn't talk about it my whole life. From the moment I crawled back to my bed at boarding school to the moment I had to talk about it on my timeline. And I snapped. I had to go away for 3 days at the psych place. It was a big deal, and I'm thankful I finally did start talking about it, because it had ruled a pretty significant part of my life. I think a lot of the compulsive sex is tied into my trauma as a kid, but also trying to prove I was a man despite what happened to me. Mm-hmm. Rape is very emasculating, I think, for almost all men, especially with our society. One thing I thought I'd hear, and I might hear someday, I'm prepared for it, is like, a man would have fought him off. Stuff like that. And I've known other people who have heard that. It had ruled a large portion of my life. And finally talking about it and addressing it was one of the hardest things I've done, but I'm glad I did. I also had to, I don't want to say forgive. I'll touch on it in a little bit when I talk about my mental health problems and how it made trauma therapy very hard, but I don't know if I could fully forgive anyone, but I found acceptance. I was shocked. I found acceptance. I thought I'd hate the older brother forever. But then we did the trauma therapy, and I found him again. And I looked into his life and saw he's just a person now, as far as I know. Family and everything, job. And it just fell away, the resentment. It had already almost all fallen away thanks to the therapy, but at that moment, it all fell away. Like dirt on some sort of thing, and then the water washes it. I'm still doing a lot of work to this day. We have to address a lot of the stuff that spun out of being abused, like we dealt with the abuse itself. I think healing from sexual assault of any kind is a lifelong thing. I don't think you get to a point, it's like, I'm all better, I'm never going to think about this again, it's over. I wish it was like that sometimes, but it's not. One thing I learned during trauma therapy is how bad the abuse statistics are in Alaska. I had passing knowledge of it, but unfortunately it's pretty, I don't want to say horrific. Maybe unfortunate, it's a kinder term. Like 1 in 3 Native Alaskan children will be physically abused, emotionally, sexually, and 1 in 7 will experience sexual abuse. And one of the things that broke me before I went to treatment was realizing I became part of that statistic. Yeah. It hit me so hard. I think it's because I became part of this unfortunate community who had to experience this. I'll acknowledge my abuse wasn't part of the typical way the statistic goes. I was adopted by a white family. I was abused by a neighbor. A lot of the abuse happens in the villages because there's hundreds of people, sometimes less than 100. And there's an unfortunate intergenerational aspect to this. I've seen it before. I've talked to people about it before. Someone's daughter is molested by a family member, but she was molested by a family member herself, and her mom was molested, and then that mom, and it's this rolling trauma passed down from generation to generation. It's really terrible. Also, I know there's a geographical problem to this, not just for investigating it. There's that too.
Mm-hmm.
There's only 3 actual cities in Alaska, and one of them you can only get to by plane. So I imagine it's very difficult to investigate this kind of stuff. But it's also the flip side. It's very hard to report this.
Sure.
Even if it's a neighbor, it's a small village. I won't speak too much on it because I'm not from a village, but I have talked to people, and it seems to be, I wouldn't quite say ubiquitous, but across the board, from the north to the south, interior, west. It's a barrier to addressing CSA in Alaska. There's also a cultural aspect, which I won't say too much on because I'm not educated on it. I think if I was to talk more about that, it'd have to be someone who knows about it, but I do know it's there. There's also my behavioral health problems. Again, if it's genetics or my mom doing the drugs and alcohol or environmental in the sense of the trauma I had as a kid. But one of the things is I'm bipolar type 1. That is characterized by really depressive episodes, but then you swing into hypomania, which is like talking fast and highly energetic and not sleeping overly much. I feel like I get a lot done when I'm like that. People in my life would disagree. But then it can, for me, it swings up into mania or something. I'm not sleeping for a few days, and I think I can do all this stuff. And I used to call them rampages. It would happen like 3 times a year. My depressive episodes are pretty few and far between. My most recent one lasted forever because they medicated me with some good stuff, and then they kept me down in depression, which my psychiatrist acknowledged was like, that wasn't kind to you, but I got through it. One of the harder things to talk about is antisocial personality disorder. It has a very strong stigma in society. I like to think it was environmental. I'm sure it played a huge role in it. But I have to acknowledge I was showing ODD behaviors before the abuse. My parents, when I talk to them about it, they say it started from the moment I could talk. Well, I didn't talk that well. I had to go to speech therapy. But I think being abused definitely accelerated that path into all the behaviors I did. And as a teenager, conduct disorder, which, again, I realize now it's because I didn't have a concept of a boundary. And then as an adult, one of the aspects I struggle with is I have cognitive empathy, which made therapy very difficult because people have tried to go the empathy route with me, but I don't traditionally feel it. I think about it and then I feel it that way. I'm not sure how to explain it too well. Like if someone saw, it sounds, again, the stigma is really bad, but if I was walking by and saw a hurt dog, I wouldn't feel bad for it, but I would recognize it's hurt and I need to help it. I like to think of it as recognizing there's something like what normal people would feel. When I say normal, I mean like neurotypical or whatever. I see it as like a hologram, and then I build up the emotion.
This podcast shares powerful stories from survivors of sexual assault, but what if we could stop some of those stories from happening in the first place? That's the idea behind Hassle. I'm Amy Watson, founder of Hassle, and I created it to focus on prevention, engaging men, workplaces and communities to challenge harmful behaviour before it escalates, instead of placing the responsibility on women to stay safe. In just over a year, we've built a movement of more than 550,000 people, reached over 250 million views, gathered more than 9,000 surveys to inform our work, and grown a network of over 3,000 ambassadors across more than 120 countries. If you'd like to hear me talk more about prevention and culture change, you can listen to episode 175 of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories. Or you can learn more at Hassle, that's HASSL.UK.
For me, it's real. I'm not pretending to be someone I'm not. Some would disagree. There was a time when I was just pretending and I was not a good person. There's a term going around nowadays called pro-social. People who have ASPD, which is pop culture term, is sociopathy. Pro-socials is you have these behaviors, but you don't act on them and you try to use them in a better way, which is what I'm doing for the last year. And it's not like I was doing unlawful stuff before that. It just, I wasn't really doing anything. That made therapy very difficult because more so at treatment, they tried to go the empathy route. And it didn't work all that well because I remember, I don't think I could talk about it too much, but they mentioned the word empathy and then they defined it. And I said, that's not what empathy is. You don't feel it, you think about it. And yeah, the person who diagnosed me with ASPD, who was a very skilled psychologist, although I want to tell him that, although he just heard it. We talked about how it was almost a blessing I got abused as a kid. When we first started talking about it, I wanted to punch him in the face. But I realize he's right, because I do experience some level of empathy for children. And he said, most likely it's because you're abused as a kid, and that created this sort of network for you to have some level of empathy. So I'm thankful for that. Now, at the time, I wasn't happy that we were discussing that. After treatment, I started seeing a psychologist for the personality disorder aspect, and then I kept seeing my CSAT. Between the two of them, things fell into place for the trauma therapy, because the CSAT was trying to go the empathy route too, which again is somewhat effective. I just have to really think about it, and it makes it difficult. But I would say now trauma therapy is going well. I see my CSAT every other week, and then between that, I see my psychologist every other week. And the swing of it seems to be working. There's times it doesn't, but the healing's happening, and I'm thankful for that. One thing I'm not fond of is there's autism on my diagnosis list, which I don't agree with at all. But every single one of my exes say, no, you do. I don't really want to say too much on it because, like I said, annoyingly, it's on my insurance. I think it's more the ASPD thing, but people disagree. I'm not sure how that really impacted my trauma therapy, but I'm sure it did. I think it ties in more to the problems understanding other people with the empathy aspect. But yeah, I think I'll be in trauma therapy for a while longer. Unfortunately, a lot's happened to me in my life. I recognize it made me who I am now. Sometimes I wish I was someone else. I wish things were better. I wish I had lots of empathy for other people. I wish I didn't have to take a pill every day to keep my mood stabilized so I don't think I can fly, which happened when I was 18. And that's why I pretty badly hurt my leg. But that's not where I'm at. And one thing I've done a lot of work on since treatment is acceptance. And I accept I'm at where I'm now, and I want to use my experiences and my mental health issues to help other people, which is why I'm doing this podcast. And I'm hoping to continue the outreach. I don't really know how, but yeah.
Joseph, I'm going to throw this in. That, first of all, after listening to you for a little over an hour, I am so sorry for the experiences that you've had that have caused your suffering and your anxiety and your issues. But at the same time, I'm so thankful that you are at a place where you are recognizing it and that you've come so far in your therapy and in your recognition for how important it is to talk about this in the way that you're talking about it, because you just said it. If it helps just one person who can relate to what you're talking about, and there are people out there that may be going through some very, very similar issues, it is so commendable and so strong of you to do what you're doing. I just thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's interesting from my perspective to talk to you because I don't know that I've ever talked to anybody who has signed an NDA about what
I know
it's all about. It's very interesting to hear somebody say, I can't talk about everything that I went through in rehab. Yeah, absolutely.
I saw my psychologist yesterday, the personality disorder one, and the only thing we really talked about at the session was the behaviors from teenagehood, what they meant, and how to talk about them today. I mentioned pro-social. That's a term that really got popularized with the general public because of a TV show called Dexter, which you've probably heard of.
Yeah,
a bunch of people have heard of it. That's more psychopathy than sociopathy, which again isn't official clinical terms. It's all antisocial personality, which I want to say is a really misleading name.
Mm-hmm.
I've mentioned it a few times to people, like in person, and they're like, "Oh, you don't like people? Me neither. I don't like crowds." Like, that's not exactly what it means. It's more like anti-societal. But yeah, a lot of people know pro-social from Dexter, which I'm not out there doing. I do think, I don't want to sound, I don't think it'd sound arrogant, but I think having to use cognitive empathy, I have better empathy than I think I would if I felt it normally. Because it's a pretty constant thing that I have to do. And I feel like it makes me see people differently when I have to guess or see what they're feeling. And again, like that hologram, see the framework and then feel it, or not feel it in my heart, but mentally. I see that as a positive. It definitely is a negative a lot of the time. Not a lot, but I'd say a bit less than half, because I can be a very selfish person and I have to overcome that. I think one of the biggest problems with my bipolar disorder in therapy is emotional stability.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be pretty emotionally stable to go through therapy. When I'm reliving some of the worst moments of my life, and if my meds are a little bit off, or I've forgotten them too many times, or I'm swinging towards a hypomanic episode or even manic or down into depression, it disrupts that therapy. Last summer, I don't remember exactly what happened. I mixed some medications I wasn't supposed to, not knowingly, but it threw me into Oh, wait, I remember. I stopped taking my meds, which bipolar people do all the time. And I swung into a pretty quick manic episode. And I remember, it's very blurry for me. All my manic episodes are blurry. I remember I wanted to go outside and sleep under the stars and absorb their power or something. I really want to talk about the mental health stuff just because it ties into the healing so much. And I don't know how many people out there have been abused and have bipolar, have been abused in ASPD. I realize now how important it is to take my meds, but also recognize where my emotions are at for the therapy. It relates to my addiction in a way that we would do this EMDR session. I'm reliving one of the worst moments of my life. And afterwards, I have all these feelings, because I do have feelings. Emotions are hard for me, but I have a lot of feelings about myself, and more tied to my trauma, probably because of what the guy who diagnosed me said. Being abused as a kid created that empathy gateway that wouldn't have been there normally. After a tough session, sometimes like the addiction will be pulling at me, and I had to remember just to regulate myself and sit in the emotions, which is hard to do when you're bipolar sometimes. So I've learned it's important to take my meds, communicate with my providers, and the biggest thing has been taking some me time and realizing what relaxes me. I've been trying to do meditation, but it's more like rumination. But I get in the sauna for like 20 minutes and I try to empty my mind, but things float by and I latch onto them and think about them. It helps me, but I do some video games and I go for walks more often than I used to. Mindful walking, something I learned at treatment, which I thought sounded super lame, but it's been very effective for me.
Yeah. It's amazing how mindful.
Yeah. But I've learned that bipolar disorder, especially type 1, doesn't make healing impossible. It's just a barrier. I really feel like the addiction spun out of my trauma. I was probably predisposed to some compulsive or addictive behaviors. There's a lot of alcoholism in the Alaska Native communities. I know some people think it's genetic. I actually do too. Some people think it's more environmental, but I feel like alcohol has rampaged through Alaska and it just keeps passing on from generation to generation. I am thankful I'm not an alcoholic. I thought I was a few points in my life, but it was more related to the trauma and the other addictive behaviors. Mm-hmm. But I do have like the sex, porn, and gambling compulsive behaviors, which I like to think of them as rather than addictions. But we live in a society where addiction's more, people understand that word more, and it's easier for them to think of what you're going through. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if I would have had those problems if I wasn't abused. Given how it manifested, I think my abuse had a big part to play. Even before I was abused, a lot of the kids were pairing up like boy girl, and they're saying like, "Oh, this is my husband," or "This is my boyfriend," "This is my girlfriend," "my wife." For me, I always wanted another male, like another guy, another boy. So there was a point in my life where I got involved with these people, and they said, "You're gay because you were abused," and I was like, "Sure, sounds good," because I was very desperate. I was just desperate. I was grasping at anything that could help me. This was right a few months before I hit my rock bottom and had that manic episode. I had a roommate when I was 18 or 19 who I told I was gay, and then the next night I was at his church being given this exorcism type thing. Obviously it didn't work, but that was kind of traumatic. I think they call it church hurt, which people experience, but I don't see it all negatively. Like I got baptized, and I remember that quite fondly. It was like a year and a half ago. And I met a lot of cool people at the church who I still talk to. The first church I went to. The second one is a bit more problematic, like I mentioned earlier. Remember, I was about 10, 11 when I got that computer, and I found my first, I don't want to say real pornography, but pornography I could choose what I wanted to watch. And one of the feelings that came up was, I want to call it connection, but it's a very warped use of that word. I wouldn't call it relief either. It was this recognition of what the older brother and I had. Like, it was kind of stimulating that. It's really weird to discuss because there was this sense of, yes, I was sexually abused. As an adult, I can see that's traumatic. As a kid, I felt that trauma. But also as a kid, those were my friends. So it felt like this recognition of, oh, this is what the older brother and I used to do and what the little brother and I tried. Finally. Like, I remember that feeling, like, finally, this is something I recognize. So I do think the abuse played a part in the addictions, but not into who I was. Does that make sense? Things, like I said, spiraled down into that rock bottom. I got back from treatment. Unfortunately, I trusted a coworker with this information, and he threatened me was going to out me. Because when I got back from treatment, I had this fear of people knowing I experienced sex addiction. It's stigmatized, kind of like the ASPD. When you tell someone you're an alcoholic, they say, oh, okay, he drinks too much. Like, it's very relatable. So many people are alcoholics. Even drug addicts, people know. People could empathize with that.
Right.
People know alcoholics and drug addicts. I would guess people have either met one in their life or know one now. But some of the other compulsive behaviors or addictions aren't discussed as much. One of those is sex addiction. And I would guess a lot of men suffer with, at the very least, an overuse of pornography. Like, pornography is all over the internet, and it's just so widely watched by men and women, older and younger. Like, pornography is just everywhere. I could say from my experience, I wish it didn't exist. I don't think it paints a healthy view of what sex is. I think people get hurt in the pornography industry because some of those actors and actresses are trafficked. Probably the second hardest thing for me to talk about this podcast is there's CSAM out there, which people know better as child pornography. It is disgustingly widespread in America. Tim Tebow presented some sort of presentation to, I think, lawmakers or representatives or something, and he showed how many unique IPs had downloaded CSAM, and it was just hundreds of thousands. It was disgusting. One of the hardest things to accept the abuse memories was in the parents' bedroom, where things didn't happen that often with the abuse. I remember all of it eventually once we started doing the trauma therapy. You walk in, there's a dresser to the left. It's very long. There's photos on it. There's some sort of dish with some sort of rocks, minerals. I don't know. The bed, the blinds they had, where the TV was situated. Just, it's all there. And there's a video camera in the corner on a tripod. And it was there when I started remembering all this, but I put it in my back pocket. I said, I can't deal with this right now. I'll deal with it later. And I kept doing that. And I just, out of my head. And that definitely wasn't healthy, because eventually it just culminated. into this relapse a few months ago, and this me almost quitting therapy, getting mad at my friends, wanted to stop taking my meds. I wish I had brought it up sooner. I couldn't bring it up sooner, though. I kept putting it out of my mind and not wanting to talk about it because the possibility of some sort of child pornography of me being out there was too painful. And the worst part is if it is out there, it's still being circulated to this day, probably. But I did finally start talking about it. We are addressing it in trauma therapy. Again, I wish I hadn't kept chucking it in the back of my mind. I don't know if you've seen Inside Out, but at one point, Joy is just sending all the bad memories in this tube, which puts it at the outside of the mind. And I feel like that's what I did until it crashed into like my main memory, and I couldn't deny it anymore. That's what led to me trying to feel better, and it was this overwhelming amount of emotions, which is why I had a relapse, and I thought I didn't need my meds, and I didn't need my therapist, and just wanted to go on a self-destructive spiral, but I didn't. And I accepted it's just a possibility. It doesn't mean it's actually out there, but I also had to live with the fact that I had to live with both sides of the possibility that it might not even be out there, but it could be out there. It was very hard to make peace with that because acceptance wasn't enough. Acceptance is, yeah, it might be out there, and there could be like a 50-year-old man watching that video of me, or there could be non-existent. But for me, peace was saying, yeah, it could be out there, but it doesn't mean it's controlling me now. And that was really hard. I leaned a lot on my peers from treatment in that time, a few of them. One of them I would call every day, which I just want to say again is why I'm so thankful for the gift of treatment. I didn't want to be known yet as a sex addict. I had planned on maybe someday in like 2 years talking about it, I have more sobriety, and I could talk about it easier. But this coworker found out about it and was going to out me. I had made him upset tremendously so. And I didn't know what the hell to do. I never thought it would happen. Like you see in TV shows, like someone finds out compromising information, like, hey, I'm going to tell everybody if you don't do this, or I'm going to do this if you don't do this for me. But it happened to me, and I was paralyzed. So I'm not an alcoholic, but I know a lot. And I went to one who's been sober a long time and is well known in the community and stuff. And I told him what happened. We talked about the traditions, which I don't know if you know, but it's like no film, press, or media. But it doesn't say anything about social media. And I talked to a few of them about this, actually, and they all agreed, just get out ahead of it. Because if you're not saying the narrative yourself when it comes out, it's very hard to steer their narrative back into what is true. So I posted about it on Facebook and Instagram, and people were very accepting, except for a few, which is fine. I was understanding of that. I was still frustrated that it was so early, but that was very difficult too. That disrupted my trauma therapy and actually led me back to, I felt like I was back in that abuse again. I don't want to say it felt similar, but it was like the same vein of being exposed and almost used. And I just felt slimy. But people were supportive. I was able to get back on track with the healing. I also am blessed with a absolutely terrific sponsor. He's my fifth one. I'm very difficult. Very, very difficult. But this one, he is so patient and he understands and he calls you out on your bullshit, but he also is supportive. I didn't talk to him for 5 months. And when I came back and I called him again, he said, I'm just glad you're not dead. I'm glad you came back. I don't care if it's 5 months, 5 years. I want you to heal. So 12 step has actually been pretty integral to my healing. I have a lot of problems with it because it's a program of honesty, and for a long time, my internal system was built on dishonesty because that's what I kept safe. It was a protective mechanism. It's probably tied into, again, the genetic or environmental oppositional conduct, antisocial train of personality disorders, but I have a tough time with 12 step, but I'm thankful for it and I do my best. And it's good that I don't just have to rely on my CSAT for sobriety. For me, sobriety has been very important to my trauma therapy and healing. I don't want to give trauma therapy all the credit. It's been very important. It's been a large chunk of moving through, healing from, however you want to phrase it, being molested and raped as a kid, and again as a teenager. But there's been other cards I've had to build to help heal from that. And recovery has been one of them. Self-care. One of the things my psychologist and I talk about is the concept of friendship. And I actually know someone else with ASPD, and I've talked to him about it. Friends are very hard for me to define. Like I have them. It's probably not the traditional definition. I like to think of them more as a tribe. Man, I hope none of my friends see this and say, oh, wow, we're not really friends. Let me block them in my phone. For me, when I say they're part of my tribe, I mean, I understand them. They understand me. They show up for me, and therefore I need to show up for them. And there's general gratitude for that. So that was another thing I had to build to help heal from the CSA, was finding my tribe, which I'm happy to say I've done a pretty good job at. I've been doing a lot of Zen stuff lately, which I don't believe in Buddhism, which is cool if you do. But the Zen aspect has helped my healing in a way I never thought it would. For me, it's being able to sit with the memories of it, the feelings, the therapy I've done, the advocacy I'm trying to do right now, and letting it come at me, but flowing off me at the same time, which I think is what meditation's all about. I have a hard time meditating, but yeah, those things have all been part of my healing journey. They've worked for me. They won't work for everyone else, and that's okay. Being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder was strange at first. For me, I always thought it was something, I grew up in the 90s and 2000s. I thought it was something an Iraq war veteran had because I saw someone get blown up or they're shot at. I never thought being sexually abused as a kid for as long as I was could be PTSD. Now, knowing what it is and doing all the healing, and I absolutely see it as a genuine post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think it could be just as real as any people's other experiences who has PTSD. done pretty well the past year as far as the PTSD, I don't know what you want to call it, PTSD attacks, panic attacks, whatever. For me, all I know is that for me, the room gets smaller. I feel small, and I'm back there in the trauma. I'm back there being abused. It's like traveling back in time. I'm like stepping into my younger body. It's horrible because I can't leave. And it's like being trapped in the room with my abuser all over again, which is one of my things I had all my life, which I didn't know the origin of. I don't like rooms. Sorry, I said that wrong. I don't like doors being closed. It's not like a constant thing, but generally, I like the door to be cracked or ideally halfway or all the way open. It's been that way as far back as I can remember. I get just a little bit of an ease when I'm in a locked room, especially with another person. Not locked, but closed. And that's because I mentioned earlier, my abuser would shut the door and be smiling as he did it. And apparently that stuck with me. PTSD. Over the last year, I've had a few attacks. It's been a few months since I've had one. My last one was actually at work. There was a travel nurse who started working at our hospital, and he looked not exactly like, but eerily close to my main abuser. I saw him. I couldn't breathe. My blood went cold. I had to hide. And I went in the closet and I hid because no one ever goes in the supply closet. And then someone went in the supply closet. Who, thankfully, I don't really know him that well. Actually, I'd actually say I don't know him almost at all, just from barely a coworker's perspective. But he saw me. I ran past him. I went and I do DBT skills, dialectical behavioral therapy. And then I got myself calmed down and I went back to work. And then I went and talked to him about it. And I really respected him because he said, I was waiting for you to come to me before you could talk about it, and don't need to tell me anything. And that was a beautiful gift. I am really glad he's the one who walked in. I wish I could give him like a rave or my hero, which is what they're called where I work, but I can't because it's not really something you can give someone for. Yeah, I've had a few other bad ones last year. When we were doing the bulk of the trauma therapy, I remember I was just laying in bed and I was looking up. Wow, I actually am just putting this together really. At my boyfriend's apartment, there's a smoke alarm up top. Sometimes I don't like it and I stare at it. And I just saw it. I instantly went back to the abuse, maybe because there was like a smoke alarm in the hallway. I don't know. This was the worst one because I like hid in the closet underneath some clothes, and then thankfully he was really patient and waited till I was ready to come out. But for me, it's crazy how much the mind and the body remembers trauma, because I do feel it in my body a lot. There's actually a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and I love that book.
Yep.
It explained trauma to me very well. I don't know if you've read it.
I have. I talk about it on this show all the time. But yeah, I've read it.
It's
amazing.
Great. Yeah, that was a particularly bad one. But like I said, my last one was months ago. That's probably because I saw someone who eerily looked like him. It was really crazy. And after I saw him and I calmed down, I went and introduced myself, and I saw he was just not that person. He was actually really cool. He was actually really funny and chill. PTSD is a real thing for CSA survivors. And don't be embarrassed or don't think it's not real or genuine if you have it from that. I have not encountered anyone who said that yet, but I'm prepared if they do. All I know is for me, it's real. And it's lessened a lot as I do the healing. I wanted to end the podcast talking about why I'm doing this advocacy, why I'm on here. I've thought about it as like 3 pillars. The first one's men experience this too. I know that's known already. I know people talk about it. I don't think it's talked about enough. I don't like the little bit of stigma that's attached to it by modern society. And few people seem to like really come forward about it. It's mostly like with their therapist versus I met a lot of women who are like, yeah, this happened to me. And I think men should be able to know that it's okay to talk about it too when you feel ready and if you feel safe. I'm not saying you have to tell everybody, but if that's what's keeping you back, I think you'd be surprised how many people would support you. Let's bring him up. There's an actor who came forward about his story. I don't know if you know. I actually forgot his name because I'm doing this podcast, so I'm nervous. James Ransone. Do you know anything about him?
Mm-mm.
He's a survivor too. I don't know him that well, like as far as movies go. I kind of want to talk him on the podcast, but I don't because it's stupid. Was abused growing up, and he was very public about his story in the early 2022, 2021. He was one of the reasons I came forward with my story. The biggest part of his story that I related to was his abuser would make him wash the sheets to hide what was going on, and I had to do that. And hearing another man talk about his experience, and it was something I related to and I experienced too, gave me the courage. He tried to do a court thing against his abuser and it didn't go through. And then I think that kind of broke him, which sucks because he, like I said, his story was absolutely integral to me talking about mine currently. I find it very tragic he killed himself recently. Not being able to get justice as he thought, maybe, I don't know, against his abuser. I'm sure that played a role. But he inspired me to keep going on with mine because people need to talk about it more. Which leads me into like my second pillar. Talk to your kid about like not being touched there and abuser, like someone who might abuse them. I can't remember if my parents ever had to talk with me. That kind of talk. They might have, but I probably wasn't listening. But I remember the stranger danger. I don't want to say it would have prevented the abuse, but I think if my parents had talked to me about that, no one touches your private parts. You're not allowed to be naked anywhere but in your bedroom. Stuff. Well, I shouldn't say like that with anybody. I think that might have helped. I think that was a point of intervention that failed me. My parents had hammered that home, even if they had talked to me about it once. I wish they would have made me understand. One of my new coworkers who saw my stuff on social media, I think, said she told her daughter, all this stuff about not letting anyone touch you there, and she made sure she'd understood. I'm very, what's the right word to say? I'm very thankful parents like that are out there, and I'm not saying my parents are bad or anything. I do see that as a system that failed me, though. And I don't care if it's uncomfortable for you. I don't care if it goes against family tradition. I don't care if it's not what's typically done where you live. There was somebody on Soft White Underbelly. There was a man on Soft White Underbelly recently who is also a CSA advocate. One thing he repeated through the video, which was kind of not uncomfortable, but like shocking almost, is he kept saying people want to fuck your kids. And it's true. And if you talk to your kid about how to protect themselves, it could save their life or a lifetime of addiction and trauma and briefly unlawful and rule-breaking behaviors like I had to go through.
Yeah.
And then my final pillar is don't silence your kid if they come forward, and believe them. It's seared into my brain how much my parents shut down while I was trying to talk to them about this. And they didn't know. I'm not mad at them. I don't blame them. I don't think they're terrible parents. I think they were scared of something they were hearing and didn't want to hear it and shut down. And I wish they had it. Because it would have saved me a lifetime of hurt, which I didn't start healing from until pretty much last year. So, don't silence your kid. And believe them. I know there's times out there the kid was mistaken or it didn't happen, but just believe your kid. Because it happens a lot. And that's why I do all this advocacy now. Those 3 pillars. If there's one thing I could say to the other survivors out there is you're not in it anymore. You're not however old. I have to tell myself I'm not 6 years old. I was on now and I can heal. I can tell somebody, I can tell my therapist and I don't know, my best friend, my spouse. I don't have to keep it hidden anymore and let it, even if it's just a little bit, erode my soul any more than it has. It's okay to talk about it. You don't have to live in the shame or the hurt or the guilt or whatever of it anymore. Which is why I'm thankful for podcasts like these.
This has been such an educational, uplifting, insightful episode. There's so much here. You think you've said a whole lot, but we could go on for another 8 hours easily, right?
Yeah.
You know, Joseph, I really am convinced listening to you that you have very, very little insight into how amazing you actually are. And I want you to open your eyes to that. You are powerful and strong and amazing. And yes, you're hurt. Everybody can hear that. We get it. Absolutely. You have every right to be hurt. What you're doing with that hurt and how you are, as you put it, advocating for those who are also hurt is so important and so commendable. I can't thank you enough. How you had the courage to reach out to me and do this. And even getting ready for it, I could tell was an issue. It was hard, but you've done an amazing, amazing thing here. And I'm so grateful for you. I can't say enough. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
It's been an honor. And it will be an honor in the future when you come back and give us an update on how things are going with you. It really will.
Yeah, might be a few years.
That's fine. As long as we stay in touch and hear from you again. That's what's important. Joseph, thank you.
Thank you.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I want to thank Joseph for the courage it took to come on and have this conversation. What he shared today is not easy to talk about, and it's not always easy to hear, but it's real, and it's happening more often than people want to acknowledge. Conversations like this are how we begin to change that. If this episode resonated with you in any way, whether through your own experiences or through someone you care about, know that you're not alone. There are resources out there. There are people who understand, and there is a path forward, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. Whether this resonated with you, challenged you, or just made you curious, I'd encourage you not to dismiss this episode too quickly. There's a lot of value in expanding what we think healing is supposed to look like. Please let others know about this episode. And as always, if you or someone you know has a story to share, you can reach out to me directly. You'll find my email address in the episode notes. Sharing this episode is just one of many ways you can do your part to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. Another way is to start by believing, because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. We'll see you next week.
I know most men listening to this would never harm a woman, but many of you have probably wondered how you can actually be part of the solution. Maybe you've seen behaviour that didn't feel right but weren't sure how to step in. Maybe you want to support women without speaking for them. Or maybe you're just worried you'll get it wrong. That's exactly the space we created Hassle for. I'm Amy Watson, and I founded Hassle to help men become part of the solution through education, training, and our Hassle Men Ambassador programme. In just over a year, we've built a community of more than 550,000 followers and over 3,000 ambassadors across more than 120 countries, seen by 250 million people worldwide. If you want to be part of building a safer culture and a safer world, I'd love for you to visit www.hassle.uk, HASSL, and explore Hassle Men. And if you'd like to hear more about my story, you can hear it right here on Sexual Assault Survivor Stories in episode 175.